The first thing you need is to create your color palette. And it's actually quite simple because you can refer to the color wheel and all you need to create that shade of off-white or gray is primary colors, yellow, blue, red. It's up to you what shade of yellow you want to choose for this painting, or red or blue. For me here, in this case, I chose Raczynska. I chose yellow ochre, but then I added quinacridone red. I also have cobalt blue as my blue. So you don't have to go with specific colors or primary colors according to a brand that you chose for your watercolors. So for example, Holbein has imidazolone yellow as the primary yellow, Perot red as the primary red, and phthalo blue red shade as the primary blue. But I'm not choosing these colors for this painting. Anytime you paint something white or off-white or something gray in watercolor, all you need is primary colors to create that natural shade of white or gray. You never really want to go for a color like Dave's gray or Payne's gray, something that's like straight out of a tube, there's my gray color, or going for like off-white, something that's, I guess it would be like a white, basically Chinese white or titanium white. You want to create your own shade of that grayish blend to recreate that shade of white. The next step is to wet the paper. Wetting the paper should not be done quickly and without a thought. You actually want to think about it for a while. You want to wet the paper for a couple of minutes. It's not something that should be done quickly because you want that water to get absorbed inside of the paper. And the longer you wet the paper, the more time it will give you to apply the colors wet on wet. Of course, you can wet the back side of the paper, but then the effect will be different because here, for example, we're just wetting the inside of the seashell. So now let's talk about the steps when we apply the colors. Step one is actually to begin with undertones. And again, to create that shade of white, off-white, or anything gray you're creating in watercolor, all you need is primary colors, yellow, blue, red. This feels more like a blue-violet, right? That's because I have more of the red and blue in that blend. Another important thing is mix colors on the paper rather than your palette. You actually want to see the separation of colors. Now, a lot of times whenever I add something bluish as an undertone is because I want to cover the highlights, the highlighted areas, and I mark this way for myself, like the areas where, okay, this is where the highlight is. I'm going to stay away from it, for example, or I'm going to apply colors over that later. But it's kind of like mapping the area just so you know, okay, this area is more highlighted, for example. The next step is to add midtones. Every color you have will have those color values, and it's very simple with watercolors. So you would grab a piece of a paper, watercolor paper, and then you'd grab one color and then you'd start with a paint that's very diluted with water, very washed off like a layer. It's just like swatches. You're creating swatches. And so you have like a water-like ratio, then you can go with a thicker paint, milk-like ratio, and then with something heavy like heavy cream-like ratio, and so on. So these are the mid-tones. You want to go with something that's in the middle, like the mid color values. This is also a blend of the same colors, basically. We're using quinacridone red here, cobalt blue, the Raczynska yellow ochre. Really just focus on the color wheel. Everything start to make sense because, again, you don't need that many colors to paint something like this. Just a simple seashell that's off-white. So as you notice, I continue blending colors on the paper mostly. Yes, I have this dirty palette, but it's just kind of like I constantly grab like, okay, quinacridone red there, the Raczynska yellow ochre, and whatever feels like in that tone that I see in the reference image. And those are the mid tones that I'm focusing on the most. Later on, I'm going to work on the contrast, and that's when I'm going to start grabbing thicker paint. So now it's the time to create a contrast. I have these mid-tones, but there's something missing, right? I need something darker there, and that's when I'm going to work on that contrast. I'm using a smaller brush, and I grab this thicker paint. It's kind of like a ratio more like between heavy cream to cream top, and I'm referring to dairy. This paint, like, it sits on the tip of my brush and I apply it to where the areas that where I see the reference, it's like the darkest little tiny areas, and right away, like, it makes a huge difference just by applying these little spots here and there, you can see right away that there's a contrast. And without a contrast, without that light and shadows, we just won't have dimension. And here's the finished painting, actually the two versions for the class. You can re-wet after you painted something. It just depends on the watercolor paper you're using. Not every paper will work for re-wetting. So for example, you don't want to use cellulose paper or some agave paper or anything like that. You want to use 100% cotton watercolor paper if you are planning to re-wet the object and add more color. And the colors I'm going to apply are exactly the same as before. I am just going for the darker tones. Whichever area needs more color, more darks, that's where I'm going to apply these primary colors with maybe an addition of the Van Dyke brown. So I just removed the masking fluid, and then I have very strong contrast just because those areas after masking stay paper white. If they are too strong, I can always go over it with a wet brush and reactivate colors around those areas that I masked. If you would like to watch or take a full class with me actually to paint this seashell, I do have it on Patreon. It's a full real-time recorded class. I talk while I am painting. So it's not just a voiceover tutorial. So please head over to Patreon. There's many classes. I have hundreds of tutorials and classes. There's over like 700 you can choose from. Become part of our community. We have a private Facebook group. So I invite you to join me on Patreon. There's also an option to buy individual classes on Patreon. But thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day.